February the 28th, I had reached 29 years of sobriety. And that this July, I will reach 5 years since, as a survivor of residential school, I publicly stated that I forgave my tormentors, the people who abused me in the years I was in residential school. It's 5 years since I publicly stated I've reached a point where I am able to forgive. And that for me is also important. Let me say that the road to success or prominence, whatever it is that I've achieved, is not something that I gloat about or parade around. But I use it mostly to talk about how did I get there, and I've always said I'm actually a very ordinary person with an exceptional ability to know when a door is going to open and to step through it before it closes again. That's what I've been gifted with. I spent the first 5 years of my life in a bush, born out on the land, spent 5 years out there. And that is probably what saved me. That is probably what set me aside from the hundreds and thousands of other survivors of residential school who have long since passed on, who have never recovered from the incredible abuse and hardships they suffered in the years they were in residential school. That I too spent 7.5 years in those institutions. I was beaten, starved, I was put in isolation, I was sexually abused. And I only came to admit that when I was 50 years old. I'm 64 now. Why? Because I didn't want to think about it. I was too angry to deal with that. And much of it, because much of it happened to me when I was 9, was I could not mentally deal with it, and so I had set it aside. Never brought it out until it became glaringly obvious that I was hiding things, dealing with things that I needed to admit to. But I could tell you that in the 7.5 years I was in residential school, it was not all bad. For one thing, I got an education. And in the 70s, when I went through the library at the residential school and the library at the local high school, there was absolutely nothing about the people, the original people of Canada, about the Inuit, about the Dene, about the Métis. I was incredibly homesick. I was 12 years old, and I wanted to find something that could tell me that my community was real, that where I came from was just not a dream. It was not a figment of my imagination. I looked for photographs, I looked for stories, and I couldn't find anything except one book written by an oblate priest called Irish of the Arctic, and it was about my hometown. It tells you about how important we were in this place called Canada. Nobody thought it was important enough to recognize who we were, that we were here, that we had a history and a culture, and we had made incredible contributions to this country. That thousands of our people, for instance, in the First and Second World War, enlisted at a time when we had no right to vote, no right to own property. Why did we do that? Some people said because this country is worth fighting for. Some people said because this is our land. Some people because we were hungry and there was somewhere to go. There was a bed and a place to stay. I remember the 70s because I read poetry and I collected quotes. I read The Hit Parader and read the lyrics of Bob Dylan. There's a line in Mr. Tambourine Man that says, "Take me far from the twisted reach of crazy sorrow." And I thought, what a beautiful line is that? That's what I wanted. Somebody to take me out of this incredible, terrible place called a residential school. I felt powerless, disowned by my family, by my community. And I remember that line. And I read Martin Luther King. And I thought, what kind of a man would just stand up and say, forgive everybody and turn the other cheek? And when all you want to do is kill and lash out and hurt everybody else, everybody that's ever hurt you. I read Julius Nyerere from Tanzania on liberation. I read Malcolm X, and I kind of like that guy. Yeah, let's go, get militant. That's the way to get things done. The messages from the American Indian movement and Mao Zedong, who said, the only real power in this world is what comes out of the barrel of a gun. I like that. And today, I look back on the things I've done. Out of the misery of residential schools, I had a network. I developed a lifelong friendship with Inuit, with the Inuvialuit, with Métis, and with Dene, right across the Northwest Territories, into the Yukon, and every community in the Northwest Territories. I developed a compassion. They were my family. They were my brothers and my sisters. The present Premier of the Northwest Territories, Bob McLeod, I went to school with him. I went to school with his wife. Former premiers like Nick Sabiston, who's now a senator, I went to school with him. Jim Antoine, a former premier, I went to school with him. So many of us, once we got a residential school, supported one another, worked together, and got ourselves elected into positions of leadership. And that was a positive. Out of the misery and the suffering, we made something good happen to ourselves. What did that foster? Well, in 1981, when the Inuit said, we ask you to support us, we want to create Nunavut, our own territory. Our leaders said, we work together on the Constitution with the Métis leaders, with the First Nations, and the Inuit leaders. The Inuit are asking for help. Let's vote in support of it. It took us many years to achieve division, but we did. That would not have been possible if we did not know one another, if we had no compassion for one another. But they came to us with their vision as we came to them with ours, and it made all the difference. When the diamond rush came to the Northwest Territories, the First Nations, the Métis, the Inuvialuit, again, all of us worked together with the government. I was a minister at that time. And by working together, setting aside our differences, we achieved some real benefits from the diamond mines. a certain percentage of the operational employment was to go to our people. A certain percentage of the employment of the operational stage was to go to northern people. And the same thing with the construction phase. Included was a percentage of the contracts to go to our people and to go to northern people. And to this day, where they were at first reluctant, the diamond mines are now celebrating the fact that they have brought prosperity to so many of our people. 60 miles from Yellowknife, where once there was a collection of little houses, now you see, you could tell who works at the diamond mine. The houses are normal-sized houses, well-built houses. Outside are 1 or 2 trucks, snowmobiles, boats. You could tell there's a shift in the leadership, where once it was the traditional leaders, the hunters and trappers. Now it's the young business people, it's the young workers who are taking over the leadership. We know that in the 80s, when our people were under siege in our traditional economy of hunting and trapping, I started Indigenous Survival International. Again, because of my network amongst the Inuit, amongst the Métis, and the Nunavut, it was easy to do. We collected ourselves from Greenland, Alaska, Yukon, Northwest Territories, Northern Quebec, the northern provinces, and we worked to fight the animal rights people, to protect our traditional economy, the fur market. We did that. By working together in the Northwest Territories, we achieved some other things as well. Revenue sharing was announced last year by the Premier, the first government in Canada to extend revenue sharing to First Peoples. We hope that this will become something that is done by all the provinces all across Canada, not only to the Inuit, but to the Métis and First Nations as well. That institutions like land use planning are adopted by people on their traditional lands as an Aboriginal inherent right, because you have plans for your land, you've always had it. And that those land use planning boards should be instituted, and they should be decision-making legally binding, not advisory, legally binding, as we have in the Northwest Territories. I go back to the things I read in high school and the things I've said as a young, militant, angry person. I wanted nothing to do with the federal government and nothing to do with the government of Northwest Territories. But some of the chiefs said, we have to talk to the governments because our people need houses. Our people need clean water. We need jobs. So we want young people like you to get yourself elected so that when we call a meeting, you are sitting on the other side. And I remember the despair in my heart when I was 26 years old. And I told the chiefs, said I'd die before I ever set foot in that place. But something happens, you know, when you have to take care of other people. You feel responsible, you're elected. When you get married and you have children, it's not so easy to say all those things anymore. And so I got elected. And as you know, I served 16 years in the legislature. Of course, there's always the danger of being colonized, assimilated, but that's the chance you take every time you engage. It's called dancing with the devil. Sometimes you can leave on your own accord, sometimes you get taken home. But somebody has to do it, and that's our job as leaders. I think back about the words that were said at that time, because we reached prosperity, and for me, prosperity is about doing well, having jobs, getting our children educated, finding economic opportunities and being included, having a good relationship with companies, with governments, and especially with one another. The first law amongst the Dene: work together, respect one another. Our elders told us that until we were sick of it. Say, oh my God, here we go again. You know, we got to go get something done. And they always said, we want you to respect one another, work together. And the things that we succeeded in were all examples of where we set aside our differences and work together. I think that's probably the single most important key to a collective, to the First Nations, to the Inuit, and to the Métis, working together. The other thing is, for me, that what is it of any use if you are not well yourself? 2003, in December, I found that I could not work anymore. I was disillusioned, I was tired, I couldn't do it anymore, and so I did not run. And I found myself sitting many times in my kitchen wondering what to do. Still full of anger, but tired. What can I do? And I realized I'm like a soldier who've gone through the traumas of war, come back, and I can't deal with the reality. I did fall apart. I mean, I went into a depression for a few years. My marriage fell apart. I couldn't take a job, not that anybody offered me a job. And that's what happened, 2003, for about a good 5 years. Out of that, I thought about healing. What do they mean by healing? I got to work on myself. You know, what the hell kind of wimpy stuff is that? Well, I started to learn. You know, as somebody said, you know, if you want to go fishing and enjoy yourself, here's a box. In this box, you're going to put all the hate and anger and fear and stress that you're carrying around. Put it in there. We'll put it over here on the shore. We'll go fishing. And if you miss it so damn much, 3 days from now when we're done fishing, you can go back to that box, load up again, and leave the way you came. A friend of mine told me that. I thought, you know, we're carrying all this stuff we don't need to. I'm mad at people that died years ago for beating me, for all the stuff that I did. I'm mad at people that are gone, like they're dead. Why am I doing that? You know, I'm still alive. I should be enjoying myself, and yet I can't get over it, you know. I'd be happy, except way back, 50 years ago, this happened to me. I mean, that's how ridiculous it sounds when you start to articulate it. But it's not an easy thing. It's taken a long time to get there. Prosperity is about doing all those things, but at the end of the day, being able to be at peace with yourself, to get rid of the anger, and to do things in a compassionate way. And so I look back on the words that I read, and it means so much more. The world that I've created, you've created, that's come along to us, is better than the world I was born into, the world I went through. It's better for my children, better for my young children, but it can get a lot better if all of us get through the business of forgiveness. That just with the commitment that I forgive, I've taken out just a little bit of anger out of this world, and there's a lot of it. You know that. You see it on the radio every day. You hear it amongst yourselves every day. Can you imagine if just the residential school survivors all said, today we forgive. To our children, don't be angry for what happened to me, because I'm not angry anymore. If you want to be angry, find your own reason, but don't use me. That's what we're talking about here, and I look back on Martin Luther King, and his words mean so much more now than they did way back in the 70s. That darkness cannot defeat darkness. Only light can do that. That hate cannot defeat hate. Only love can do that. I know what that means. I know what it means now. I know that take me far from the twisted reach of crazy sorrow. Nobody else did that. I had to do that myself. I did that. I'm not saying I'm totally happy, deliriously happy by any means. I went to a photo shoot this morning and they were trying to make me smile. And it's not a natural thing for me, you know. When my wife said, well, a little bit of advice on your way over there, she said, think of grandchildren or flowers in the spring or something. Don't do that forced smile because it doesn't work. So I thank you for inviting me here. I hope that it's of some use to you because, as I said, we want to leave this world a little better place than we had it, but it's got a catch that we have to get rid of the negative stuff. That if we have a negative, we've got to replace it with a positive. If you say something negative, you got to come up with something positive to add to it. That's leadership. It's about people wanting to follow you because you have such a great idea. It's about compassion, showing compassion about the way you do things. Because we're not machines. You know, we are human beings. We have feelings. We have families. We have histories. We have our own hurts and sorrows. And we have to show compassion for one another. And that's how we become wise. That we have to learn how to work together. You know, sulking, not talking to each other, verbally abusing each other. All that happens, you have to forgive and say, okay, but we have to work together. That's the single biggest key. And at the end of the day, for each of you individually, I would say for me, healing has been the key. That what use would have it been if I had completely fallen apart after retiring from public life because I couldn't heal. I'm here because I went on a healing journey. And that has made all the difference. And I would wish on each and every one of you. That's prosperity. To be at peace, to feel good, to wake up in the morning and look at the sun and say, the Creator has given me another day. He didn't have to. He doesn't have to give it to the little kid across the street or the rich man next door. He doesn't have to give it to any one of us. But every day that he does, we have to find something good to pay him back for it. not to beat up on our neighbor or to criticize, create a negative energy, because that's not the way we want to answer to him when we see him. Thank you very much. Merci.